Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind UK. Let's watch.
Don't have sex before marriage because it's very important to keep that as a secret. No. How about you?
Yeah, no, it's been good. A few spats. But now we're good now. We spoke about it. That's one thing about him. He's really good at talking things.
That's good.
Yeah, we've been good. We've been good.
Yeah.
We had a bit of a blip a couple of days ago.
Okay, so the couples all seem to be doing relatively well. I thought at this phase I might make some predictions midstream here. I'm guessing I'm going to be wrong about a lot of these, and y'all are going to be laughing at me. Ben and Nicole, I'm just going to take a guess and say yes for them. I am not super confident, but I would say I'm a 5 out of 10 on that one. Steven and Sabrina, they don't really show much of them, which I think usually means that there's no drama and they're doing relatively well. But I'm going to take a guess and say that it's a yes, but I'm only like a 4 out of 10, maybe 3 out of 10. Maybe Ben and Nicole, I'm more like a 7 out of 10 confidence. Bobby and Jasmine, I can't really tell. They don't really show us much of them either. Yeah, I don't know. There's something about the two of them, the way that they come together, that makes me wonder if one of them is going to be a no, if not both. I can't imagine them breaking up before the altar. So I'm going to guess and say that at least one of them is going to be a no. I'm only a 3 out of 10 on that. Freddie and Kat, as the season is progressing, they seem to be stronger as a couple, and they seem to be bonding pretty well. So strangely, I'm going to take a guess and say that they're a yes, and I'm a 4 out of 10 on that one. Ollie and Demi, I'm going to take a guess and say that Ollie is going to be a no, not because of any of the classic reasons, but just because they did have some ups and downs, which I think set them down a road that I think for both of them, I could see Demi saying no as well, but I could also see them saying yes. Yeah, so that one's on the fence. They're the couple that we've seen the most of thus far, so I'm gonna guess that's a tough one. Most end up not getting married, so I'm just gonna say based on that, that'll push me to one side of the fence that one of them's gonna say no, and I'm a 4 out of 10 on that. Tom and Maria, I'm going to take a guess that one of them is going to be a no there as well, just because of lack of chemistry or something. I mean, they claim there's chemistry, but the way that they talk, particularly the way Tom talks, but I think Maria is put off by it. Anyway, so Maria and Tom are both talking about a fight that they had, and I'm guessing that they're talking about that fight or discussion that they had about class. They didn't say the word class specifically, but about her job. I'm guessing that's what it's about, but let's see what happens here.
Yeah. We had a bit of a blip a couple of days ago. I went out for dinner and I got dinner and then went out for breakfast the next morning. And she was like, I'll get this, babe. And I was just like, oh, thanks, babe.
Yeah.
Didn't even think about it. And she was sort of being quite monosyllabic, wasn't really communicating the way that...
Oh, so this sounds like a different blip. He is... I want to rewind this because I'm a bit confused. So let's rewind.
Days ago, I went out for dinner and I got dinner and then went out for breakfast.
We went out for dinner and I got dinner, meaning that he paid for it. Went out for breakfast the next morning.
And she was like, I'll get this, babe. And I was just like...
And she said, I'll get this. And he said, oh, thanks, babe. And then she seemed upset about it to him.
Oh, thanks, babe.
Yeah.
Didn't even think about it. And she was sort of being quite monosyllabic, wasn't really communicating the way that she normally does with me. She was like, can we have a chat? In the kind of initial courtship phase, her views that men should just basically cover everything.
I think that if you have a view like that, I would voice that so that someone isn't taken off guard. I guess I'm basing that on my own cultural pocket. I can't imagine anyone that I know having that point of view that she has. But it's not like there aren't ideas about gender and dating and paying for things. It's just less rigid, but still kind of in that direction. But this is his story, but she was upset, thinking that he dropped the ball, or I don't know what her view is about that. Has talked about how her family has a more traditional culture and that gender is a part of that. I find that if you just have an open conversation about it and talk about your feelings and talk about what feels fair. But the thing is that there's a lot of psychopathology or schemas or personality disorder spectra that can be involved in this. I've treated couples that have had major fights about this very thing. And the real thing that's being fought about is not whether or not someone's paying for it. It has to do with the individual's traumas. Like one person, like the Toms of the world, might have been used by a previous partner for their money, or the Marias of the world, from this side of the argument, might have a schema regarding feeling incompetent and needing someone to save them, and paying for things is in that camp. And also not feeling responsible. This is a personality disorder and personality trait and schema that is not usually talked about. I mean, really, the only personality that's talked about on the internet is narcissism. And I swear to you, I am getting tired of seeing the memes and the discussions online around narcissism. I mean, I would venture, this is just anecdotal, but literally 99% of the crap that is being posted online and discussed online about narcissism has nothing to do with narcissism. Not even like remotely, especially when we're talking about the personality disorder. But if we're not talking about the personality disorder, then we're just kind of talking about self-centeredness, but that's hard to pin down. We don't really have, anyway, point is that it's not surprising that people don't understand the schema that I'm talking about, where people are raised in a way that make them feel incompetent and make them feel like they need to depend on other people. We call this dependent personality. A lot of people will say codependent, but that's a completely different, if not opposite, personality. But these individuals pathologically believe that they cannot do things on their own. And because they were prevented from doing things on their own, and they prevent themselves from doing things on their own as they grow up, they actually are kind of incompetent at things, but they're not inherently incompetent. They are just unpracticed at things. And so these individuals pathologically believe that they're incompetent, and the only solution is if someone else takes care of them. And they are terrified and very scared, and they are constantly seeking the safety of the competent other. The problem is, if you're looking for a competent other, often you will find an abusive other, because the mirror image to that schema is someone that wants to be in control. Another type of other is a codependent other, someone that is overly responsible for other people. And these dynamics can be, highly problematic. And so I have no idea if that's what's going on here with Maria. I mean, it could just be just a minor conversation about something. But I was referring to, I've treated couples where they will fight about this for years. They'll come into my office, and then I will discover over time that there is either an abusive, controlling, or a codependent person on this end, and then there's an overly dependent person on this end, and they feel like it's sort of like, if we use borderline as an example for distortion, because most people know about that, or preoccupied attachment, that when you're raised in a certain way and you will, like you text your partner, you're the preoccupied person, you text your partner, they don't text you back right away, and you start to distort and become paranoid that they're cheating on you or they're going to leave you. So that's a distortion based on trauma, right? Okay, so if we look at dependent personality, for that individual, not all the time, but one of the manifestations that's common is in an equal marriage or long-term relationship, the dependent person looks at their partner and asks them to pay for everything and do everything. And so for the dependent person, they're giving over that power because they believe they can't do it. And their only safety is if someone else does it. And their only safety is if the other person is very competent or seems very competent, is a thing, or wants to be very competent, And so for the individual, their distortion is they can't learn on their own and they can't do things on their own. And if the other person refuses to do it, then they're unsafe, and that person doesn't love them, and the other person is being unfair. It's kind of weird. It's like, if you don't pay for things, you are wronging me, not just because of fairness of money and that kind of thing. But the distortion is all, the easiest way to look at it is that if you went to dinner with your family and you have your kids there, and you turn to your 8-year-old and you say, okay, it's your turn to pay for dinner, the 8-year-old would say, huh? What are you talking about? And you're like, hey, it's your turn. You got to pay. And the 8-year-old would say, you're joking. No, and if you kept pushing it, the 8-year-old would maybe throw a tantrum or start crying or run out of the restaurant or something, right? Well, that's the way dependent people feel. Not entirely, but it's in that direction. That's how distorted that dependent people are. They're just like, are you kidding? They feel like they're children on the inside. They're walking around with adult vocabulary and they have a job and everything, but they do not feel like an actual adult. And in the same way, they don't feel, in the same way that an 8-year-old shouldn't be responsible for your feelings, hopefully you should be talking with your therapist or your partners or your friends. You shouldn't be burdening your 8-year-old with your problems as a parent. I mean, there's wiggle room there, of course, but, generally speaking, you wouldn't expect an 8-year-old to just voluntarily take care of you, right? And you would maybe push back on it. But when you're dependent, you have that mindset. And so in a relationship, the dependent person won't be taking care of the other person. And so when this person wants to be taken care of, the dependent person is like, what are you talking about? I'm a good partner because of our dynamic, right? Consciously, they feel like it's balanced and fair the way that an 8-year-old would feel like it's fair. But it's not fair because there's no taking care of the dependent person, and it can be symbolized or highlighted by who pays for dinner or who takes care of the other person in practical matters. But really, it has to do with the emotional side. Anyway, I doubt that's what's happening here, but let's continue watching.
And I hadn't even thought of that. Do you know what I mean? Like, she says that she would feel embarrassed being seen to pay for something when we're out together. I said to her, if I told my mum that, she would flip her lid. She'd be like, I would be feeling insulted if a guy pays for everything.
Okay, so we're hearing from Tom that 2 statements were made by Maria, that she's saying, I would be embarrassed if we were in public and you didn't pay. And then also, if my mom saw you do this, not pay, and make me pay, then she would flip her lid. Okay. Well, I mean, it's good that they're having this conversation. And yeah, I wonder where this is coming from. If they were in my office, I wouldn't necessarily have to ask Tom that much, because I feel like based on what he's saying here, I would get where he's coming from culturally, I guess. And so I would ask her to help me to understand. And also, if this is how she wants it to be, then how does she want to navigate that? And is there a compromise there between the two of them, Like, typically, culturally speaking, from my standpoint, I have the impulse, if I had a client like this, to get her to change, right? Because it's like, why would you have it that way? And also, those kinds of traditional gender roles have a lot of problems with it, right? Because, on one hand, it's like, yay, I don't have to pay for anything. But on the other side, there's a price to that often in those kinds of traditional gender role cultures where you don't have power or you don't have a job or something, you know what I mean? Case by case. But I come from a culture where we at least try to have more equality and have things be more flat and more flexible, I suppose. But I shouldn't assume that my culture is the way. And so I have to pull back a little bit. Now, sometimes just because something is different culturally, that doesn't mean that it should be, accepted as healthy, right? There's plenty of unhealthy things about my culture, right? And it goes all ways, right? So I would, in this scenario, not, without knowing more, I wouldn't assume that what her wish regarding this, I wouldn't assume that it's unhealthy. The point of couple therapy is not for me to solve their problems, but for me to help them solve their problems themselves. So I would facilitate communication, and I'd be hoping to get them to a place where they could both understand the other person and allow and accept it, for him to accept, oh, that's your point of view. Okay, well, I don't know if I've ever run into that before, but okay, I accept it and I don't consider it to be an insult or wrong or something, and her to him. And then, okay, how are we going to navigate this? How important is it to us? What are the implications of that? Is there a compromise, or do we go with one or the other? He might decide, well, okay, I guess I'll just pay. It's not really my way, and it does kind of sting a little bit, but given the way that you're talking about how important this is to you, I'm willing to adjust. So let's see. It looks like they haven't really resolved it.
Exactly. But it was just one of those big things where, like, you know, when we're talking about not having enough time, that didn't raise itself until a few days ago. I'm like, there will be other things. I know that there will be. So it becomes, that obviously makes you think, you know, are we really ready?
Are we really ready? Yeah. I mean, as I said earlier, I was not predicting that they would say yes, yes at the altar anyway. And so this could be another nail in the coffin.
I kind of feel like all of the pod squads kind of like trauma bonded. No one's ever gonna experience what we've experienced. So we do have that bond that no one else can kind of
Yeah, that's not the technical definition of trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is like Stockholm syndrome, where as you are being traumatized by someone, you bond with the perpetrator, like in an abusive relationship, or the classic Stockholm syndrome scenario where you are a hostage in a bank heist and you, as a victim, over time start to bond with and want to protect the bank robbers. That's where Stockholm syndrome comes from my memory. We just don't really have a term for bonding. The only term I can think of is more of an idiom, which is like the foxhole syndrome or something, right? You go through something that's very difficult and you bond together because of how difficult it was and how much you depended on each other. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.